meron tayo tinawag doon Pantry and Pharmacy because we are offering yung goodies from plants and farms. Kaya naman naging pharmacy kasi ang gusto natin fresh produce from the farms para makinabang ng diretso yung mga farmers ng Laguna. Gusto rin natin ma-promote yung sariling product ng UPLB. Mamimigay tayo ng ornamental plants for them na ma-appreciate kasi part ng healing din yun yung ornamental. Mamimigay din tayo ng mga seeds and seedlings for them na magtanim. Naging showcase itong ating Pantry and Pharmacy, naging showcase ng mga products ng science and technology output ng UPLB. That makes us unique.
Magaan sa loob kasi kahit pa paano naisipan pa rin na mag-share.
Napakalaking bagay po para sa pamilya ko po ito. Sa tulong nito, mapapag-agdo-andon po din yung mga pangangailangan.
Thankful po kasi mahirap po makalabas ngayon. So at least meron po tayong mga volunteers na service po para sa mga free na pagkain po para sa empleyado ng UP po.
Ako nilapitan ay si Sir Jerry po na inirefer naman ako kay Vice Chancellor Roby Sereno at kay Chancellor Camacho hanggang tulong-tulong na yung mga iba't ibang mga Vice Chancellors ng University. Akala ko nga isang araw lang siya pero tumagal tayo ng pangalawang week kasi kahit sino tumutulong, nagbibigay, nakita nyo naman, nagbibigay ng iba't ibang uri ng donasyon na ipagpatuloy natin saka na i-actualize natin yung konsepto ng bayanihan. Kahit nga hindi ko kakilala na nakakasalubong ko, nagbibigay ng kung ano-anong mga uri ng tulong. Kaya na-sustain natin at tumagal tayo ng 2 weeks.
Getting all the support from faculty and staff and even alumni as a crisis is there. I think we will keep doing this because this is a university. I think we all know very well that aside from its foundational values anchored on honor excellence, I think we should always consider that part of our reason for being as a state university is service. So we'll do everything necessary to address especially the problems and needs of our less privileged sectors of the university.
Malaking tulong para sa pamilya.
Kaya po.
Malaking tulong para sa amin makakaraos ng araw-araw. Malaking tulong. Salamat!
Thank you.
Ay, nagpapasalamat po kami sa mga nag-volunteer, sa mga nagbigay po ng mga pagkain para sa amin. Malaking bagay po ito para po sa amin. Maraming pong salamat sa mga tumulong po sa amin.
Ayun, thank you din sa kanila kasi this na ginawa nila itong initiative na to. And then nabas din naman ako before na UPLB has been doing it since even before without pandemic like yung sa library. So, thank you lalo dahil tinuloy nila yung gantong tradition in helping the UPLB constituents.
Siyempre, ito ay hindi magiging posible kung wala ang suporta ng UPLB administration. Pumayag na magkaroon tayo ng community pantry kahit nga may COVID. Siyempre, ang laki ng tulong ng alumni natin. Bumubuhos talaga yung tulong galing sa kanila. At ang nakakatuwa, kahit hindi alumni, hindi rin konektado dito sa UPLB, basta nakabalita na may community pantry, nagbibigay talaga sila. Meron din tayong yung mga binibilhan naming magsasaka, pag nalalaman nilang para sa pantry, nagbibigay pa sila ng sobra. So, ang daming tumutulong. So, this time naman nakakatuwa kasi ang tinutulungan naman natin ay staff natin. So, tingin ko buhay na buhay naman yung spirit of giving din and caring dito sa UPLB. Kaya hindi imposible yung mga ganitong proyekto.
Well, the Filipino is very vibrant, no? Very helping and very active and very mapagkalinga. So yung bayanihan spirit talagang umiiral dito, no? So sundin lang natin yung minimum health protocols and then overflowing ang ating donors and other sponsors. Kaya natin to gawin pang matagalan. This is just another form of imbis na nagdi-distribution tayo sa bahay-bahay. sila naman yung pupunta rito and they get whatever they want. Hindi nga, pinipilit pa nga natin dagdagan, lalo na yung vegetables.
So kumbaga within sa UPLB community, sa job orders, sa contract of service, agency hired personnel ng UPLB. Sa UPLB kasi community, bigay lang tayo ng bigay para sa kanila kasi alam natin yung hirap ng ating mga specific na target na beneficiaries.
Dito sa UPLB ay it's a collaborative work ng buong universidad. Spark ito nung Maginhawa Pantry. So, ginaya rin natin sapagkat marami rin tayong ICS tsaka COS na mga no work, no pay personnel. So, lahat ng naririto na nakakaluwag, grupo man o individual, nagbigay ng tulong. At hindi lang ito yung tulong na galing dito sa loob, kundi in-outsource din natin yung mga ibang tagalabas. Halimbawa, yung mga produce, galing ito sa mga magsasaka na kumbaga since magbibigay din ang UP personnel na nakakaluwag or a group, binibili natin sa mga farmers from adjacent municipalities yung kanilang produce para yun ang ating ibibigay dito.
At nare-recognize natin na kailangan nila ng tulong. Kaya yun siguro yung yun yung espiritu ng bayanihan, yung pagdamay sa kapwa. Ito yung nagpapatuloy sa mga ganitong klase ng proyekto.
Good afternoon to all our viewers on YouTube and Facebook. Welcome to Usapang Bayanihan, examining the community pantry movement from multidisciplinary lenses. Since the first community pantry opened last month in Maginhawa Street, Quezon City, more and more of these donation-based food assistance projects have begun to pop up all over the country. Following the maxim of magbigay ayon sa kakayahan, kumuha batay sa pangangailangan, they have become remarkably successful wherever they are open to help those in need during this pandemic. In light of this ongoing phenomena, UPLB as an academic institution believes that it is appropriate for community pantries to be examined not only at face value but also through scholarly perspectives. Throughout this webinar, we will look at the community pantry phenomenon through the different lenses of various academic disciplines, and in doing so, gain a deeper understanding of how such phenomenon has emerged, why it has gained so much popularity so fast, and what are its implications for us as a society moving forward. For this second webinar episode, we have psychology and human ecology as our lenses. The first to share is Mr. Jholyan Fornillos of the Division of Sociology-Anthropology and Psychology of the Department of Social Sciences. He titled his presentation, More Than Filling Empty Bellies, Understanding Community Pantries from the Lens of Psychology. The second speaker is Assistant Professor Nephtaly Botor of the Department of Human and Family Development Studies with his presentation on Kakayahan, Pangangailangan at Kalinga, Community Pantries, Psychosocial Wellbeing, and the Pyramid of Care. And reacting to these talks are Assistant Professors Paolo, Yema, and Raphael Ferrer. Thanks to all of you for taking time this weekend to share with us your insights and reflections on the Philippines community pantries. I also thank the hardworking staff of the university who put this webinar series together. To our viewers, I encourage you to engage in this webinar series by commenting and sharing your thoughts and your own experiences related to community pantries. We hope that at the conclusion of this series, you will gain a better appreciation of this incredible social movement that showcases the Filipino spirit of compassion and concern for others, as well as collaboration and cooperation with our fellow Filipinos during this time of crisis and calamity. Thank you. Stay safe. Mabuhay tayong lahat.
Magandang hapon po sa lahat ng tagapakinig ng Usaping Bayanihan. Ako po si Jholyan Fornillos. Isa po akong faculty member mula sa Departamento ng Agham Panlipunan, Universidad ng Pilipinas, Los Baños. Ngayong hapon, susubukan po nating pag-usapan ang community pantries gamit po ang psikolohiya bilang lens. Hayaan niyo po akong i-share ang aking presentation. Ang presentation ko po ngayong hapon ay pinamagatang More Than Filling Empty Bellies, Understanding Community Pantries from the Lens of Psychology. At ito po ang magiging daloy ng ating panayam. Una, we will try to contextualize the COVID-19 pandemic from a mental health perspective. Then, we will try to examine the relationships between unemployment, food insecurity, and mental health. After that, we will try to explain the emergence of community pantries from the lens of psychology. And then finally, I will give some take-home points that we can get out of the community pantry phenomenon. But first of all, I'd like to posit that the COVID-19 pandemic is more than just an epidemiological crisis. We have to understand that this is also a mental health crisis. Why? Because as the pandemic continues, we will surely experience a lot of losses. Nandyan yung loss of life, the loss of a sense of safety, of social connections and personal freedom, and more importantly, nandyan yung loss of jobs and financial security. In fact, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority, tumaas daw ang unemployment rate from 8.7% noong January 2021 to 8.8% noong February 2021. These numbers translate to a number of 4.2 million Filipinos who were left jobless due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And because of that, with rising unemployment comes food insecurity. And based po on my readings, I'd like to define food insecurity as kawalang kakayahan na makakuha ng sapat, abot kaya, ligtas at masustansyang pagkain. Ngayon, suriin naman po natin yung effect ng food insecurity sa mental health. Research converge that food insecurity takes a toll on mental health. In fact, food insecurity is associated to a myriad of mental health issues. Nandyan yung chronic stress, no? In some severe cases, maaring mag-decide yung mga taong gutom na kunin ang kanilang sariling buhay. Pwede din itong mag-lead to substance use disorders. And it can even affect relationships negatively, no? Yung relationships ng mga taong magkakasama sa isang bahay. I firmly believe that these mental health issues need no further explanation because alam naman natin na mainit talaga ang ulo ng taong gutom. Ngayon, paano naman sinusolusyonan ng mga psikolohista at iba pang mga health professionals ang mga mental health issues na maaaring ma-experience ng isang tao sa isang krisis? So I'd like to introduce you to the Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Pyramid. Ito po ay finormulate ng Interagency Standing Committee na binubuo ng iba't ibang ahensya kagaya ng Red Cross, Medicine Sans Frontiers, Save the Children, at in some cases, the government. So before anything else, let's try to define what mental health and psychosocial support is. So MHPSS is defined as a composite term to describe any type of local or outside support that aims to protect or promote psychosocial well-being and or to prevent or treat mental disorders. Now that we are already familiar with what MHPSS is, sabi nga nila, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That is why there are some important points that we can get out of this pyramid. First, assuming that people's coping resources are still working, only 3 to 5% of the population would experience severe psychological disorders. Second, many people, kung makikita niyo po dyan sa number 2 and number 3, many people would experience mild to moderate mental health issues. And we say, from psychology, that these are normal reactions to an abnormal situation. Finally, many more people would need or would require their basic needs to be met. And sabi nga nila, sa madaling sabi, mahirapan nga namang makinig, ang isang taong gutom sa payong ibibigay ng isang psikolohista. And this is where our community pantries come in as a necessary intervention. So before anything else, let's try to define what community pantries is. Kasi naniniwala po ako na bago po natin maintindihan ng isang bagay, mahalaga muna na bigyan natin ito ng pagpapakahulugan. So what is a community pantry? I define community pantry as a form of mutual aid that aims to build food security and improve quality of life by allowing people to donate whatever they can and to take only what they need. Take note that I'm saying that community pantries are not charity, they are a mutual aid. So in psychology, we define mutual aid as a solidarity-based type of support wherein communities unite to address a common struggle. From this definition, we can also realize that community pantries offer more than food. They also provide psychological relief. In fact, masasabi natin na binibigyan ng community pantries ng panandaliang ginhawa ang mga taong nahihirapan sa panahon ng pandemya. Some researchers would even say that community pantries could even restore people's dignity by allowing them to receive the food they need, to donate and volunteer if able, and to encourage others to do the same. Now, let's try to explain bakit nga ba dumami or lumaganap ang community pantries sa panahon ng COVID-19 pandemic. Disclaimer lang po, that from psychology, we could say that there are many psychological perspectives that can be used in explaining the emergence of community pantries. However, for the sake of my presentation, I would like to use a psychological frame that is culturally appropriate and relevant. And allow me to begin by saying na sa isip, sa salita at sa gawa, importante para sa ating mga Pilipino ang relasyon o ugnayan. This notion is actually the basic premise of the theory of kapwa na finormulate po ng ama ng psikolohiyang Pilipino na si Virgilio Enriquez. So ano nga ba ang kapwa? Kapwa is not synonymous with other in English. In fact, kapwa is defined as the shared identity of the self and other. Ano nga ba ang identities, no? Ano nga ba yung mga pagkakakilanlan na ating pinagsasaluhan sa ibang tao? Maaring nandyan yung idea of similarities, no? Kaya may konsepto tayo ng katrabaho, kanayon, kabarangay. Also, nandyan din yung notion na pare-pareho tayo ng pinagdadaanan sa panahon ng pandemya, no? Pareho tayo ng pinagdadaan ng hirap, pinagdadaan ng sakripisyo. So kasama din po yun sa mga pagkakakilanlan na ating pinagsasaluhan with other people. And of course, nandyan yung notion ng yung pagiging tao, no? Yung shared humanity. Now, let's try to understand ano nga ba yung implications ng shared identity. First implication, it helps us recognize that others are part of ourselves. We call that in psychology as identification with an other. So madaling sabi, no, ibig sabihin niya, no, na tinitignan natin ang ibang tao as part of ourselves, hindi sila naiiba sa atin. And another implication of this shared identity is the recognition of connectedness, na nararamdaman natin na konektado tayo sa ibang tao. Ngayon, alam na natin kung ano ang kapwa at ang implication ng shared identity na ito. So ano nga ba ang katangian ng taong may kapwa? Una, ang taong may kapwa ay kinikilala at nirerespeto ang dignidad at halaga ng bawat isa. Pangalawa, ang taong may kapwa ay tinatrato ang bawat isa bilang kanyang kapantay. Pangatlo, ang taong may kapwa ay sinusubukang maging patas at hindi nananamantala ng iba. Fourth, ang taong may kapwa ay ayaw na nakakaramdam na nauupi ang iba o nakakaramdam ang iba na hindi sila kasali. Next, ang taong may kapwa ay kinikilala na ang makakasama sa kanya ay makakasama rin sa iba. Ang taong may kapwa ay nasasaktan sa kabiguan ng iba. Next, ang taong may kapwa ay natutuwa sa tagumpay ng iba. And finally, ang taong may kapwa ay hindi lamang sariling interes ang iniisip. Having said all those things, no, ngayon na alam natin na kung ano ang katangian ng taong may kapwa, I would like to float this question to let our listeners ponder and think about President Duterte's pandemic response. Masasabi ba natin na ang pagtugon ng administrasyong ito sa pandemya ay makatao at isinasaalang-alang ang kapakanan ng kanyang kapwa, no? Of course, bahala na po kayong sagutin yung tanong. Also, I'd like to show this slide because I want to point out that sometimes in the conduct of our duty or perhaps simply in interacting with others, we cannot deny the fact that we can hurt them, no? Maaari nating saktan ang damdamin ng ating kapwa. However, to intentionally hurt others is a different story. Ngayon, tingnan naman natin ang pakikipagkapwa from an indigenous worldview, yung katutubong pagtingin. Sinasabi natin na ang buhay ay walang katiyakan. Sabi nga, no, bilog ang mundo. Minsan, swerte tayo, minsan malas. Or some people would say, or some people would believe in the notion na gulong ang buhay, no? Or gulong ng palad, na minsan nasa ibabaw tayo, minsan nasa ilalim. And also, apart from that, may mga bagay sa mundo, no? May mga puwersa sa mundo that are out of our control. Kaya nga sinasabi ng psikolohiyang Pilipino na we engage in pakikipagkapwa because we have because we want to have some degree of certainty in our lives. In fact, knowing that someone is willing to stand by our side, especially during our darkest times, would give us hope that the world is a safe and a better place to live in. So, mabalik ako doon sa napakahalagang tanong na ito. No? Bakit nga ba dumami o lumaganap ang community pantry sa panahon ng COVID-19 pandemic? It's because tinitignan natin ang ating mga kapwa Pilipino as kapwa. And because of this, we are motivated to help them exercise their rights and meet their needs. Also, nasabi din natin that we have this concept of self-preservation. Evolutionary psychology would tell us that we behave in ways that ensure our survival. Ang technical term po dyan ay self-preservation. However, I'd like to argue that self-preservation is a project that could be balanced with a project of preserving the nation. For me, this is coming from the contention that people are free agents. Anong ibig sabihin ng idea ng free agents? It only means to say that we are producers of experiences and shapers of events. Albert Bandura, a renowned psychologist, said that the heart of human agency is self-efficacy. Kapag sinabi niyo pong self-efficacy, it's people's belief in their capabilities to exercise some measure of control over their functioning and environmental events. Kapag naniniwala po tayo na makakaya po natin kontrolin ang ating sarili at ang ating environment, chances are we behave in ways consistent to that belief at makukuha po natin ang ating aims, ang ating mga gusto. That is for Albert Bandura. And a derivative concept of that is the notion or the concept of collective efficacy. And it is defined as a group's shared belief in its conjoined capability to organize and execute the courses of action required to produce given levels of attainment. Bakit ko po pinipresenta ang concept ng collective efficacy? This is because I want to highlight that apart from the recognition of our shared identity, community pantries are a product of people's collective efficacy. Nagtutulong-tulong po tayo para ma-solve ang ating common struggle, which is basically yung kahirapan at mga paghihirap na nararamdaman natin dulot ng pandemya. So if we believe that we can produce our desired changes, we behave in ways consistent with that belief, and eventually we will be able to attain what we want. So having said all those things, gusto ko pong magtapos by giving some greater life lessons that we can gain out of the community pantry phenomenon. So first lesson, I'd like to say that a crisis such as the COVID-19 pandemic can bring out the best or the worst in people. In fact, there are people who are making personal sacrifices to get our society through the pandemic. Nandyan yung ating mga health workers, mga volunteers ng community pantries. Nandyan si Patreng na nagpasimula ng community pantry sa Maginhawa. However, let us not forget that there are also individuals who will use the pandemic for their self-serving interest. And bahala na po kayo sa pag-identify kung sino po yung mga tao na yun. Second lesson is that we have to be mindful of our privileges. Bago po natin sabihin na ang ibang tao ay pasaway o walang disiplina, siguro mahalaga po na isipin muna natin yung mga pribilehiyong ating tinatamasa. Sabi nga po ni David Barr, we are in the same boat but not in the same storm. Iba-iba po tayo ng pinagdadaanan sa buhay. Maaring for some, meron tayong pera para makapag-imbak ng pagkain para hindi po tayo lumabas. But let us not forget na may mga kapwa po tayo, kapwa Pilipino, na arawan kong kumita. Kaya wala po silang choice kundi lumabas. And we also have to recognize na hindi din naman po lalabas ang mga tao kung sapat ang tulong na ibinibigay ng ating pamahalaan. Kaya again, before we label people, let's reflect on the privileges that we have and the privileges that we enjoy. And dito din po pumapasok yung konsepto ng social justice perspective na we have to recognize that health and even mental health is not apolitical. Because sino nga naman po yung nagde-decide kung kailan po i-distribute yung vaccine? Halimbawa, ano po ba yung mga role ng government doon sa pandemic response? Of course, social justice perspective tells us na hindi po talaga may iwasan, na hindi idamay ang gobyerno, no, sa usapin ng health and sa mental health. In fact, no, kapag nag-analyze po tayo ng situation, it must tackle issues of equity, access, self-determination, interdependence, accountability, and social responsibility. And part po nun, dito ang ating government. We have to understand that need is not equal to greed. In fact, no, community pantries dispel the discriminatory view that people who live at the fringes of society are selfish and greedy. Matuto po sana tayong tratuhin ang mga taong nasa laylayan ng lipunan bilang kapwa. Hindi yung sa panahon na nga nahihirapan ang lahat, i-discriminate pa po natin sila. Fourth, resilience is impossible without outside support such as the assistance of the government. I'd like to highlight this point because resilience is originally viewed as an internal attribute of a person. Kaya nga po maraming scholars ang nagsasabi na nagagamit ang resilience bilang scapegoat ng ilang mga gobyerno for their inaction. Sabi nga po nila, resilience is defined as the ability to bounce back and quickly recover from the experience of an adversity. However, I'd like to point out in this presentation that bouncing back to the normal or to the baseline is not enough. We have to bounce forward. We have to come back stronger and to be better prepared for the future. Dahil alam naman po natin na marami pang krisis tayong kakaharapin. Hindi lang po ang COVID-19 pandemic. Also, dapat tingnan po natin ang resilience as a developmental process in which factors in the environment interact with the characteristics of the person to produce positive outcomes or competence despite exposure to adverse conditions. Ang gusto ko lang pong sabihin dito is that who we are and what we will become is a product of the interaction of nature and nurture. Hindi po tayo magiging resilient ng tayo-tayo lang. Mahalaga po ang input ng ating mga kapamilya, ng ating mga kaibigan, at kasama din dyan po yung tulong, no, yung ambag ng gobyerno. Fifth and the last point, community pantries teach us that there is still hope. In fact, research converged that hope is a critical factor in preventing people from developing psychological disorders. Sabi nga, no, despite the difficulties we confront in this pandemic, let us not forget that there are countless packets of light, small gestures of kindness, compassion, and connection that remind us that the future is not bleak and that everything will work out for the best in the end. Sabi nga ni Erik Erikson, no, isang psychologist, hope is both the earliest and the most indispensable virtue inherent in the state of being alive. If life is to be sustained, hope must remain, even where confidence is wounded, trust impaired. So with that, maraming salamat po sa pakikinig.
Isang mapagpalayang araw po sa ating lahat. I am Paolo Yema, an assistant professor from the Department of Social Sciences, UPLB, and I will be giving my reaction on the previous presentation on understanding community pantries from the lens of psychology. But before that, please allow me to congratulate Mr. Jholyan Fornillos for a job well done. I I would like to commend our speaker for the structuring of his presentation on the psychology behind community pantries by using a culturally appropriate and culturally relevant perspective. Indeed, it gave us an informed analysis about how community pantries emerge in this challenging time. It made us realize people's motivations for helping their kapwa, exercise their rights, and meet their needs. It allowed us to see our inner core as Filipinos. Allow me to reiterate some highlights of the presentation that I find important for us to remember. Number 1, food insecurity takes a toll on our mental health. The COVID-19 pandemic is more than just an epidemiological crisis. Other than a health crisis, it has become a mental health crisis. Kahit sino naman na mawawalan ng trabaho at magugutom ay makararanas ng di magagandang pakiramdam na makakaapekto sa kanyang pagkatao. That is why, point number 2, it is important that people's basic needs like food and shelter are addressed. Hindi pa saway ang mga tao. Napipilitan silang gawin ang mga bagay dahil wala silang pamamaraan para matugunan ang kanilang mga pangangailangan. MHPSS would remind us that the re-establishment of security, adequate governance, and services that address basic physical needs such as food, shelter, water, basic health care, and control of communicable diseases will protect the well-being of the people. As far as we're concerned, community pantries are helping stabilize the society by restoring the dignity of individuals and communities by providing basic needs and safe spaces. Then, kapwa psychology is important to better understand the people's pandemic experiences. Kapwa is the core value of us being Filipinos. Kapwa is the core where our other values emanate. If we value kapwa, we recognize that what is helpful or harmful to others or to us will be helpful and harmful to others. If we value kapwa, we recognize and respect the dignity and worth of every people despite their status in life. Walang maiiwan lalo na ang mga nasa laylayan. Lahat sabay-sabay aangat dahil kapwa natin ang isa't isa. Kaya, masasabi mo bang makakapwa-tao ang isang opisyal ng gobyerno na lantarang hindi sumusunod sa batas? O di kaya naman ay gumagamit ng puwersa, dahas o pananakot upang buwagin ang mga naitayong community pantries? Makakapwa ba ang mga opisyal ng gobyerno na nanghuhuli ng mga mamamayan na maagang pumipila sa mga community pantries para makabahagi ng sapat na kakainin sa araw-araw? Dahil lamang nilabag nila ang curfew hours. Makakapwa ba ang paglalatag ng mga pulisiya na hindi lubusang pinag-iisipan ang kapakanan na napakaraming Pilipino? And in the truest sense of pakikipagkapwa, and that's point number 4, community pantries are mutual aid that allow Filipinos of every walk of life to participate and be in solidarity with their fellow Filipinos. And this emanates from our value of kapwa. Lahat tayo pare-pareho ang pinagdadaanan. Lahat tayo pare-pareho ng hinaing at panawagan. We recognize the needs of our kapwa. That is why we act in accordance to the common good. Kung meron mang makakatulong sa kapwa Pilipino, ay walang iba kundi mismong kapwa Pilipino. And by this level of participation, point number 5, community pantries give hope. And hope is a critical factor not only in preventing people from developing mental health issues, but also in allowing people to look forward for better things to come. Umaasa tayo na pagkatapos ng unos na ating nararanasan, ay may bagong araw na paparating. Umaasa tayo sa pagbabago na matapos ang ating pagkakalugmok ay muli tayong makakabangon bilang isang bansa. Marami pong salamat sa inyong lahat at hangad ko ang isang makakapwang bansang umaagos ang pag-asa.
Na-sustain natin kasi maraming gusto pa rin tumulong kasi nararamdaman at alam nila yung pinagdadaanan ng ating mga kapwa empleyado sa UPLB.
Yan nga, maraming mga empleyado dito sa UPLB na nangangailangan talaga ng tulong.
Nalaman po namin ito through our director na need namin tumulong sa community pantry dito sa UPLB.
Lahat ng taong nangangailangan. Bayanihan to, hindi tayo nagpipilitan. So talagang overflowing yung donations natin dito.
Kahit hindi alumni, hindi rin konektado dito sa UPLB, basta nakabalita na may community pantry, nagbibigay talaga sila.
Ayun, kailangan talaga kasi nating magtulungan lagi. Bilang isang pamayanan, importante na nagtutulungan tayo.
Masarap sa pakiramdam na nakakatulong sa ibang tao, sa mga UPLB, employee din naman ang tinutulungan natin ng ICS.
Binigyan natin ng pagkakataon ng sarili nating tumulong sa mga nangangailangan, yun ang nag-spark. We will continue doing this until na makita natin na okay na ang sitwasyon.
Ngayon lang namin napatunayan na hindi kami pinabayaan ng mga permanent staff ng UPLB. Nagpapasalamat po kami sa ganitong paraan na natulungan nila kami. Especially po dun sa mga nag-initiate na mabuo tong UPLB Community Pantry. Nagpapasalamat po kami.
Hanggat may mga generous donors na nagbibigay sa atin at kumikilos upang magkaroon pa ng stocks, yun po ang gagawin natin.
Good day everyone, I am Nephtaly Botor from the Department of Human and Family Development Studies at the College of Human Ecology. And today I hope to engage with you into a reflection about the community pantry phenomenon and what it means for us, individuals positioned in layers and layers of socio-ecological systems. There are myriads of ways of looking at the phenomenon and through which we can make sense of this event in the community. That is, the way people have responded to the needs of others and the limitations and resources due to various economic, political, and sociocultural reasons. Some of these ways of looking were highlighted in the first installment of this series of discussions. This afternoon, much of what I'll be sharing with you come from my experience as a disaster mental health responder who worked with individuals and families in distress in post-disaster situations such as Typhoon Yolanda, the Taal volcanic eruption, and the drug war, which took away not only material possessions but also lives of some of our fellow Filipinos. I think it is necessary that I lay down my positionality in terms of how I view health in general and mental health in particular. I subscribe to the idea that health and mental health are not only biomedical phenomena, but are more so psychosocial phenomena that are greatly affected by various factors, such as individual differences, the dynamics of the family systems where we belong to, and the milieu and characteristics of the larger community where we all are situated. That include socioeconomic vulnerabilities, gender, and other forms of privileges or oppression that play around with circumstances that people experience. The pandemic then and other health consequences emerging from it will have to be viewed in the light of kaginhawaan or well-being. How much our events and consequences in the various socio-ecological systems are taking people either closer or away from well-being. Such a clear positionality is necessary in our appreciation of the emergence of community pantries as a psychosocial phenomenon that help people establish a sense of well-being amid this challenging time. And this also emphasizes the idea that there are risks and protective factors across all levels that either alleviate people's suffering or prolong and intensify their distress. Because of our will to live and our will to survive, we tend to create opportunities for nurturance that we need. Whenever the systems and infrastructures and institutions we are holding on to are failing, we try to create these opportunities to foster one another and help one another become better amid the difficult situation. And this, I guess, now borders toward the discussion on resilience and adversity quotient and post-adversarial growth that all pertain to our ability, or in some cases inability, to manage our crisis experience, the way we deal with the crisis situations, with the adversities that we are faced in, and how we are able to survive, to bounce forward, to become better in the middle of these adversities. With this, I'd like to start by asking you to look at this picture and think about what this picture means to you. At the onset of the pandemic, some of my colleagues in the disaster response advocacy have been reflecting how we may be able to extend the humanitarian support that we used to do in previous disasters, especially that physical contact and proximity are not allowed. However, as the timeline moves fast forward, we learned that whenever there is a need for support, there would always be ways to extend and receive it. It only needs some form of conviction and clear intention among the people who would provide or seek for it. True enough, for the past months, there have been invitations by several organizations that include schools, workplaces, and not-for-profit organizations to talk about mental health and psychosocial support amid the pandemic, even amid physical distancing. We resort to technology-mediated, remote-implemented delivery of the psychosocial sessions or psychoeducational sessions. And every time I show them this picture at the start of my presentation, you always receive mixed responses and mixed reactions from people. What I gained from people's responses is that this minute entity, the coronavirus, which causes the disease that we all are afraid of, has brought forth monumental changes in the way they live their lives and the way we operate and navigate life in the previous years. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit us in the early months of 2020, there was no denying that we were battling a health crisis. The immediate response then was to make sure that we all are physically healthy and that all are following healthy protocols to ensure that there would be lesser transmission of the virus in the community. For instance, we remember starting the pandemic with children's song to make us remember that there's a proper way of hand washing. In our department, we took part in this health promotion advocacy that helped children and their families understand the situation and remember simple ways to deal with it effectively through children's stories and storytelling. For many of us, though, we never thought that it would escalate into such a magnitude and that the situation would be having such a huge impact in our lives. Who would have thought in the first place that we will experience such a catastrophe, such a difficult health crisis in our lifetime? We never thought about these happening way back in 2019. However, as we continue to battle with COVID-19 pandemic, we also realize that the health crisis that we are facing is also a psychosocial, and for some, even a psychosocial spiritual crisis. There was realistic fear of contracting the disease. There was mortality salience, or the realization that all of us are vulnerable to death, that all of us can actually die. And this somehow has affected the way we relate with one another, we relate with ourselves, especially when we realize that the pandemic has become so close to home, and the statistics that we hear in the news are slowly becoming names and faces of friends or friends of friends or even family. The routines have greatly changed and movement has been constrained, and therefore those coping mechanisms that we usually use to help us deal with family issues and concerns or even work-related concerns have diminished. We couldn't go to the mall as often, we couldn't go around as often, we couldn't address real-time issues as often because of the changes in circumstances. Most importantly, there was great uncertainty due to not knowing until when this is going to last, and due to the unavailability of information that we can truly rely on, as well as services that can alleviate the difficulties that we have. All these might have made people feel hopeless, helpless, and distressed. Nonetheless, in the workshops that I've facilitated amid the pandemic since it started way back in March, people also talked about a 2020 vision. Some said last year was 2020, and it seems it gave us a 2020 vision, a clearer vision, opportunities to see the things that are essential more clearly than we used to see them. And one interesting thing related to this that I observe here happening even before the community pantries is the emergence of small-scale delivery services in Los Baños. We usually take food for granted, especially in a place like Los Baños where everything is easily accessible. Just go to one side of the campus or one side of the town, you get the chance to enjoy the most delicious food available. But we saw how the pandemic has made us realize and appreciate more those little food businesses, those nameless people who feed us before the pandemic, yung mga tita, tito natin na kinakainan natin before the pandemic. We realize kumusta kaya sila ngayon at ano kaya yung kanilang ginagawa ngayon. But then again, everyone was so eager to help and still provide the services they need to extend to the needing and wanting public, such that we observe new behavioral trends, among which is what I said, the rise of local delivery services. I've come to talk to a few riders, and I would like to honor them as well in this brief sharing. Considering the task of running errands, especially if you're talking about groceries and household supplies, I reckon that these services are not charging as high. And a huge part of the services, I think, is really that service, which I think might be related to the phenomenon of collective support and action that we are all seeing now, at least locally in Los Baños, especially in the context of the community pantries that are rising in many parts of the nation and of the country. When I first learned about the community pantry in Maginhawa and the ripple effect that it had caused in various locations in the country, I couldn't think of any other but the phrase that we usually remind people to do during our psychosocial trainings, that we hope everyone would become a part in creating caring and compassionate communities for all. Hence, with this, I believe that community pantries are a biophilic response to a situation where there is great mortality salience. It is life-aiming, it is life-achieving, and it is life-giving, both to the one giving, to the one organizing, and to the one orchestrating the exchanges of services and goods, and to the receiver of these services as well. At the core of this insight about community pantry as a biophilic response is reflecting on the nature of disasters as a form of collective suffering and the journey that people take when they are in a catastrophic and potentially traumatizing experience. When we are in a disaster situation, when everything is bleak, despondent, and needing, we Filipinos are more inclined to engage in burden sharing and therefore task sharing. Task sharing is a process now recognized by global mental health advocates as a necessary process to augment necessities in low resource situations. It is also something which I think emerges from the unique psychology of kapwa, our shared humanity, wherein we see ourselves in others and others in us, such that we also feel the pains and suffering and of others as our own. And therefore, we tend to be having more motivation as well to join them, to join others in a journey towards collective healing, which would mean resolving the painful experience either by dealing with the emotion that these experiences bring, or addressing the concern in the system and making sure that the parts and parcels of that system is working. So this being said, we now think of the community pantry as a form of collective healing wherein people are working together to augment or to replace or to offer alternatives to an otherwise working part of the system. So that's one way of probably looking at community pantries as an alternative mechanism to a certain part of the system which is not working. We know that extraordinary times breed extraordinary measures. Abnormal situations breed abnormal responses. But what is beautiful in the community pantry phenomenon is that it is oriented towards being concerned not only about one's survival, but also about the recovery and well-being of others in our community, especially those who are in most need. It is oriented towards care, which is the potentiality gained from one's social interest, as someone Adlerian might call it, to the actual provision of what is necessary for others, not only to survive, but to thrive in a difficult situation and move forward away from it. I got reminded of several anecdotes from Yolanda way back in 2013 and 2014. Stories that counter the looting narrative by some people. If you remember, there were news then about cases of looting in stores where a mob would come in and take over these stores and get as much goods as they can. There were actually several people I encountered in that post-disaster response who noted that to use the word looting did not give justice to what really happened. For these people I conversed with, what happened was that there were people who were hungry, there were abandoned stores where abandoned goods are there, and people only took what they needed. They even shared these goods to extended families and neighbors. I am no expert about laws and the legal implications of these behaviors, but for someone involved in the humanitarian work and who is specializing in disaster mental health, I know for sure that disasters can either bring the best or the worst of and in us. And that some extreme behaviors are necessary to survive in extreme circumstances, such as what we are in right now. Hence, I will not be shocked to validate that either narratives might be possible. That indeed the so-called looting is motivated by biophilic reasons, and that it is in a way a form of life-aiming behavior. In darkest circumstances like what we are experiencing now, I would be comforted to hear stories that also emerge from people's character strengths, a term coined by the positive psychology movement to refer to whatever is good, whatever is beautiful, and whatever is strong in the human person. So these are manifestations of our character strengths. Community pantries are manifestations of the good, the beautiful, and the strong in every one of us. Of course, some people might question intentionalities and intentions of others who are making use of this opportunity for their own reasons, but generally, as it is, as the genuine response that people do to help one another, as the community pantries that are emerging in our locality are in their current state, we can say that these are emerging from our character strengths. In crisis situations, we see a unique persona of the carer, the tagapagkalinga, someone who is going through the same ordeal or pains as the one being cared, but has a recognition of one's resources and limitations. and is driven by the genuine intention of helping others assuage their anxieties to whatever good means they are capable of. Then we see the unique persona of the one being initially cared for, the kinakalinga, someone going through a painful and difficult situations, someone who has limited resources, but when fostered and helped, can also choose to help themselves and can evolve into being a carer later on once they're able to harness their own strengths. So see that kind of journey from being a victim of a difficult circumstances, being someone who is needing to be cared for, towards being a survivor or someone who needs to be cared for and at the same time who is able to care for others. All of a sudden, we now see the caring process as an interdependent process wherein the carer and the one being cared actually support each other, are interdependent on each other, and can collectively achieve their collective goals for healing and wellness hand in hand, based on what they can give and what they can offer, and based on what is needed in a particular circumstances. So care in this aspect is not just anymore a noun that needs thinking or contemplating, that to the point that we are in a thought paralysis already. But it becomes a verb that needs doing and a verb that needs our action. Most importantly, in the community pantry phenomenon, we are reminded of the mental health and psychosocial support pyramid, or what usually I would love to call the pyramid of care. Now, this pyramid is an intervention framework which shows that there are hierarchy of services that need to be delivered in the community, that some people might be needing a little more specialized services as compared to others, but that at the base, at the bottom of the pyramid, basic services and basic utilities have to be provided to everyone who have experienced the crisis situation. We realize that even in a health crisis and psychosocial crisis like the pandemic, food and other utilities are basic, and that goes at the bottom part of the pyramid of care, that these need to be provided first before we provide any other form of mental health and psychosocial support to people. Because the provision of food can actually be, we actually have a certain psychosocial dimension in it. It may actually resolve a lot of stressors that people experience. And we also realize that while we will continue to help one another, care for one another, there are just things that are beyond our control and command. And that there is a need for institutions, the upper layer of the pyramid, which have resources and which are mandated to promote the well-being of people through their oath of service, to take a more proactive role in committing to people's psychosocial well-being by providing the services that we need in humane and dignified ways. It is needed to underscore here that helping is good, but that there are better ways of helping than others. We need to be mindful of this because we might not know that we are already catering some form of humanitarian aid-induced stress. So there's something like that. You are helping, and that you are bringing in more stress to the people that you are helping. And people who are in crisis situations do not anymore need that on top of the already exhausting situation that they are in. The pyramid of care also reminds us that we do not need to be experts or specialists or professionals to be able to help. At each level of the pyramid, everyone has a part to play. No part is is insignificant. Every part is significant. All are essential in different circumstances. Psychosocial support is a synergized and coordinated dance among stakeholders, and part of them are the people who are survivors of the catastrophe themselves. So now the community pantry phenomenon, we see people who are all battling the same pandemic and yet harnessing whatever is in them to be able to contribute and take part and give whatever it is that they have in that situation. The pyramid of care also reminds us that across the levels of services, we need to promote self-care. But even though we are promoting self-care, we also articulate that help is available whenever needed through a functioning referral system. So this, I guess, is one reason why there's a need for us to call for accountability, because we can only do so much, and that there would be instances and circumstances that the needs of the community, the needs of individuals, families, and communities is something that we may not be able to provide at our level. And therefore, the systems of services that are needed to provide more specialized forms of services have to be put in place. The services in the upper layer of the, or upper, layer of the pyramid of care. And this goes now to the final point which I want to drive, the need for advocacy even in such a commonly romanticized field of mental health and psychosocial support and humanitarian work, that contrary to what many believes, these services are not apolitical. Caring is not apolitical. Mental health is not apolitical. And our politics lean towards those who are in need of help. The politics of care lean towards those people who are vulnerable, who are marginalized, who are more disadvantaged as compared to the men. In my practice, I realized from narratives among people, from the stories and narratives that I hear, that there are three interlocking realities in any crisis situation. First is the type and severity of the catastrophic experience. Second are the vulnerabilities and risks across socio-ecological levels, such as individual predispositions, intrafamilial risks, poverty, oppression, and violence, and that would include neglect as the most subtle form of violence. And three is the lack of social support services. These interlocking realities require political will. They require changes in the system that mental health advocates like us can only take part and contribute in, but not and cannot totally do on our own alone. With this, I would like to end my sharing by reminding us, let us all be part of creating caring and compassionate ecologies for all. It is something that we need to do at the personal, family, and community level. May we be able to do the needful, to continue caring based on what we have. May we be able to be courageous enough to seek help, to continue connecting with others, to fulfill our needs. And when all are failing, may we be able to call for accountability and engage those who are given powers by their mandates to work with us hand in hand towards well-being, towards healing, and towards a recovery from the difficult situations that we are in. So thank you very much to the organizers of this event, and may we all be safe and well as we survive and thrive amid the pandemic that we are all in. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you, Professor Nephtaly Joel B. Botor, for that enlightening take on the community pantry. Thank you to the organizers as well for giving me a chance to talk about the said topic. First of all, I would like to say that I agree with Professor Botor that we are experiencing a psychosocial crisis. I'm saying this while I'm alone in my room in front of a computer because, like everyone else, my movements are limited to flatten the curve and to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We are alone while being together. Like what Sherry Turkle said, we are alone together and technology has become the engineers of our relationships. Arundhati Roy, at the beginning of the quarantine, wrote that the pandemic is a portal. But is it really? Are the changes in our relationships and how power is distributed in our society happening? In the community pantries, I observe a similarity with the really free market or gift economy phenomenon that started in the New Zealand and spread across Europe and the United States. However, the big difference is that the community pantries in our country is a reaction to a crisis situation, as mentioned before. So there's a big difference. Like the really free market, the only rule is magbigay ayon sa kakayahan, kumuha ayon sa pangangailangan. It is also environmentally friendly in a sense that it decreases waste production because you don't buy or throw away things, and it does not over-extract. So why is the pandemic a portal? What changes in power relations do we see? I would like to point out that community pantries is not just about charity or kindness, although that is a big part of it. It needs to be emphasized that aside from charity and kindness, the community pantry is an economic alternative. It is a jab to the concept of the free market. And it is based on the psychology because it looks at what we as individuals value. It encourages us to take away greed and materialism. That is why I agree with Professor Botor that this is a journey from collective suffering to collective healing. Hindi lang dahil sa mabait tayo, kundi dahil may nakikita tayong mas magandang posibilidad, mas magandang alternatibo, mas magandang hinaharap. Since Professor Botor mentioned the hand washing through the happy birthday song and the children's stories, I would like to point out that there is a need to integrate developmental psychology or human development with humanitarian efforts because women and children's needs are usually not addressed in relief goods. For instance, the provision of sanitary napkins and the establishment of child-friendly spaces. So in this context, we organized a bulilit pantry, as seen in this photo, and it caters to children's needs and provides nutritious food and educational materials. Like what one of our co-faculty always say, hindi dahil naibigay mo na ang pangangailangan ng mga magulang, ay natugunan mo na rin ang pangangailangan ng mga anak o ng mga bata. Finally, I would like to point out that community pantries show the necessity of reflexivity in social sciences. In social media, trolls would always ask, anong ambag mo? I remember feeling irritated every time I see comments like this on social media. And up to now, I still do not agree with the line of argument that this question is leading to. However, it indicates that people are looking for action and not just words or empty assertions. Reflexivity means that reflection and action affect the person doing the examination, investigation, or theorizing. In a sense, it means that in today's world, our articulation of our proposed alternatives is not just through words, papers, or reflection, but it must also come through our actions. If we remember at the start of the pandemic, the academe organized free online trainings and webinars to help our fellow Filipinos, and those things are very good. But after a while, we quickly realized that we are experiencing another phenomenon called webinar fatigue. This is because, as Professor Botor mentioned, care is a verb and it needs doing. It needs action. It is not apolitical, it is geared towards people in need, the vulnerable, the marginalized, and the disadvantaged. I guess this is part of the reason why the community pantries became viral, because people wanted to see and experience, not just hear about or listen to lectures on how to care and increase our collective well-being. I remember the line from Panatang Makabayan before it was revised. We used to recite this in every morning in front of the Philippine flag. Sisikapin kong maging isang tunay na Pilipino sa isip, sa salita, at sa gawa. Notice that it is not just in consciousness and in words. It is also shown in action. Let me leave you with a quote from Paulo Freire, a philosopher and educator from Brazil. He said that liberation is praxis, the action and reflection of men and women upon their world in order to transform it. Thank you once again for your time and thank you for listening, and may we have a fruitful day ahead of us.
Good afternoon. It is an honor for me to close these insightful presentations of our speakers today. Every time we speak of a concept and talk about ideas, people would always say, you can't just talk. You need to walk the talk. People would expect us to do things consistent with our claims. They demand us appropriate results to back up our words, and actions are expected to match our promises. In the case of UP Los Baños, we walked. We walked the extra mile first before we start talking. For 2 weeks from April 19 to 30, we have set up and sustained a community pantry that helped and assisted our close to 1,000 no work, no pay workers in the university. After the successful walk, we do the talking now. We, the organizers of the pantry and of this webinar series, specifically identified and chose individuals who are expert practitioners of their field to discuss this community pantry phenomenon, the community pantry movement in the Philippines, from different lenses, from varying perspectives or points of view. Thank you to the speakers for stressing the community pantry's potential for collective action. In desperate times like this, amidst the lacking and inefficient response of the government to the pandemic and to the consequent deprivation to our people, initiatives like this, people helping people, people supporting each other, has become our temporary way out of the crisis. May these presentations add to the chorus of calls to the government to address these pandemic-induced complex problems with solutions that are detailed, effective, and pragmatic. What our country needs right now are concrete solutions against the pandemic and an actual response to alleviate the worsening situation of the people, a response that would never label individuals and groups who want to help as kontrabidas and enemies. Nawa rin ay ipagpatuloy natin ang diwa ng pagdadamayan at pagkalinga sa kapwa. Normal sa tao na mag-isip at kumilos para sa kanyang sarili. Kung palalawakin natin ang sariling ito ay kasama ang kanyang pamilya sa pagpupunyagi para sa ligaya at ginhawa. Ang preserbasyon ng sarili ang unang batas ng kalikasan. Ang tao, una sa lahat, ay kumikilos para sa kanyang sariling kapakanan. Ngunit sa panahon ng ganitong krisis, kailangan nating umigpaw sa ganyang pananaw. Kailangan nating kumilos ng lumalagpas sa ating mga sarili. Ang kapwa, lalo na ang mga nangangailangan, ay kabahagi dapat ng ating pagkilos. Ganito raw umuusbong ang mga bayani. Mga individual at grupong hindi man mapagpapatayuan ng mga monumento o mabanggit ang kani-kanilang mga pangalan, ay integral na bahagi naman ng salaysay ng bansa sa mapanindigang pagharap nito sa mapanghamong krisis. Huwag po tayong mananawa sana sa pagtulong at paglilingkod sa kapwa at bayan. Thank you, and I hope that everyone remains safe and healthy. Mabuhay ang diwa ng pagdadamayan at bayanihang Filipino.